Our next session, titled Building a Culture of Rapid Innovation, will be moderated by Jason Jaworski, Senior Director at Michael Best Strategies. Please welcome our speakers, Martin Rasser, Senior Advisor for Economy at SCSP, and Jeff Erasm, Advisor at J2 Ventures.
Hi, thanks everybody. As the voice of God said, this is going to be a panel on building an infrastructure of innovation in the national security space. We're going to talk about that both kind of at a cultural level in terms of the bureaucracy. We're also going to talk about some of the policies and budgeting and things that affect that, as well as the broader ecosystem. You know, how does private capital and R&D play in this whole ecosystem? But first, by way of introductions, my name is Jason Jaworski. I'm a Senior Director at Michael Best Strategies. Just a little bit of my background. Spent a long time in Congress as a congressional aide. I was the House Republican members for a long time, had a brief stint at the Heritage Foundation. And then during the first Trump administration, the last 2 years, I was head of legislative affairs at the Office of Management and Budget. Was not specifically involved in the budget development, but obviously as Leg Affairs kind of had oversight and a broad view of that whole process. Came back to the Hill, was an appropriations clerk for the Senate Homeland Appropriations Subcommittee for 2 years for a couple of budget cycles. And then the last 2 years I was on the Hill, was in the Speaker's office, so with Speakers McCarthy, Speaker Johnson, leading up all the budget, appropriations, and tax space before joining Michael Best Strategies. So have a little bit of knowledge in this area, but very, very high level. So I'm going to learn more than most of you all will during this panel today. But wanted to just give everybody a chance for brief introductions. Martin and Jeff here. So Martin, if you want to say a couple words about your background.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's great to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. So currently at SCSP, I worked in government for over 12 years in the intelligence community, but I think most relevant to this discussion, I did 2 stints at tech startups that focused exclusively on doing business with the U.S. government. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, so my quick background, started life in the Marine Corps, from there to law school, from there a little more time downrange, went into big consulting for a few years, and then started my first startup, which was a GovTech incubator, actually just walk that way. Have been working in the government to Startup Intersect ever since, as an advisor to J2 Ventures, as a contractor to DARPA, where I'm helping them with their acquisitions processes, and advising a couple family offices on their startup investment strategies with a federal focus.
Great. Well, we'll just go on and get into it, and we'll have a little bit of a freewheeling conversation and try to cover all the main topics. But we'll see where this goes. So, first question is for Martin. We talk about procurement, but that's not always necessarily end state, and it can be, I guess, superficial if the government itself isn't rapidly adopting and scaling innovative technologies. Do you see that as a problem, and what can we do within these bureaucracies, within these agencies, to make sure that they're adopting these things quickly and at scale?
Yeah, it's absolutely a problem, right? If you look at the pace of technological change, particularly in technologies that are really going to impact U.S. national security, U.S. economic security, artificial intelligence, quantum information science, biotechnologies are just a few examples. The risk of falling behind is huge, right? If you think of technology as really being at the center of strategic competition, technology being enabler of political, economic, and military power, it's critically important that we get that right. And what we're currently facing within the U.S. government and within the Department of Defense in particular, I think, is that it's taking too long to bring in cutting-edge technologies. It's a particular challenge for non-traditional defense companies, so startups that don't know how to navigate the acquisition processes and bureaucracy. It's a tremendous hurdle, and not enough has been done to address that. There's a few exceptions. The Defense Innovation Unit has been moderately successful, I believe, in terms of bringing in some capabilities. But at the end of the day, it's a very small percentage, I believe less than 1% of the overall defense acquisition budget. So scaling these new capabilities has been a big problem and something that we need to address and do so in short order because our adversaries are not sitting still.
Switching gears a little bit, Jeff, this one's primarily for you, but everybody talks about the Valley of Death these days. I think it's kind of a little bit cliche, but are there some specific, what do you think is the most specific and maybe overlooked choke points that you see as startups are trying to engage with the Department of Defense or even throughout other people in the national security ecosphere?
Yeah, great question. Actually, just in order to frame the response here, can I just get a show of hands? How many of you are government? And how many of you are startups trying to sell to governments? Who's everybody else then? Like, you're private sector, you're service providers. Okay, we have a lot of people who are just here on a Friday afternoon because they want to learn about defense innovation. Fair enough. Here's what I would say. I think really a critical and overlooked part of success as a startup is customer discovery. Like if you read any good book about how to start your startup, Lean Startup, I think is like the preeminent manual on how to do a startup and how to do innovation in a small resource confined business. The first thing you do is customer discovery. It is incredibly hard to do that. Like if you have a great idea that the Army should be using whatever their maintenance groups, try to get a hold of a maintainer. Just go on LinkedIn this afternoon, write 5 emails to people who have whatever helicopter maintenance listed as their job title, see how many respond. It will be a vanishingly small number, and that is preclusive of getting quality product into the hand of warfighters. Like if people won't tell industry what they need or have a conversation with industry about what sorts of requirements they have, how can we as industry possibly deliver a solution to them? So my message would be this underlooked thing. Don't stigmatize. Don't be afraid of industry. We're all here. We are absolutely here to make money, but we're also often there to help. And we can't help you if you don't be transparent about what you need.
So this is a little bit for both of you and kind of dovetails off that point a little bit, but on the purely sort of cultural aspects of bureaucracies, right? There's the kind of notion that the risk factors always encourage you to say no over yes. People are worried about congressional oversight or making large mistakes. What can be done to make people inside these agencies feel kind of more rationalize that risk reward? So that they are able to sort of go out on a limb, make some sort of risky decisions, and procure these innovative solutions.
Well, part of that is you need to set up the proper incentives, right? In order, if you want people to change their behavior, you have to reward people that actually do what you want them to do. So I think just from a personnel management standpoint, there's some interesting things that could happen, right? So say if you want people to adopt AI tools to introduce greater efficiencies, how about letting people keep 20% of the money savings as a bonus? Add that to their compensation package. So there's little things like that you can do to start shifting the culture. But there's also some broader just ways of doing business. For example, creating buckets of money that fund capability, so portfolio approach as opposed to individual line items. Because as soon as you start seeing that a better solution to the problem you're trying to solve comes along, then the acquisition officer actually has the leeway to shift resources to that new capability. You don't have to go through the whole process of setting up a new line item and then building out to a program of record. So, that's not going to change overnight, right? Because this whole system has been built up over the course of decades. But I think there are some pragmatic steps that we can take now to start pushing change through the system.
This might be a little bit of counter-programming, but maybe it's useful for for startups and for people that are interested in getting into the field. I mean, there's good reasons why folks in these agencies might hesitate, right? So what should founders, what should startups think when they're thinking about doing work with, say, the Department of Defense? What's sort of a defense of the bureaucracy, right? What are their best arguments that they make that are legitimate hurdles that people maybe don't appreciate from the outside? Maybe Jeff, if you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is a compliance-based community, right? Let's be honest. Like, nobody gets to skip ranks in the military. It doesn't matter how good a captain you are, you don't get to skip major. You want to get major, you don't. It doesn't matter how good you are as a captain, you don't get to skip the PME to become a major. This is a rigid, compliance-based system. It was built for an organization of 1.5 million in the greater DoD. Big systems that were built for individuals across the spectrum of capacity and moral rectitude. And that's great. They built wonderful systems to help address and build up the lowest common denominator, and I love the DoD for it. The DIs at Parris Island and San Diego are miracle workers because they have wonderful systems designed for people coming out of middle America at 18 years old. That being said, those same systems, I don't think you can transfer the culture and the systems that were designed to address that framework, where the greatest determiner of American national security is just, can we put more baseline trained infantry, Marines, and soldiers on the front line? Similarly, a lot of the systems were designed with the Cold War mentality of, we have a system designed in a world where if we can just put enough tanks in Germany, that is a good guarantor of American national security. If you look across the FAR, like the weighted guidelines methodologies, up and down the systems, the defense is these were systems that worked very well when the big threat was big armor coming in from Russia. No question about it. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. Although maybe it is the case, I don't know. But it is not the only threat to American and Western national security. And I think that the systems that were designed for that era just don't apply today.
We've talked about the bureaucracy and the culture a little bit, but Congress is always working on. I mean, this is a known issue, right? And Congress is working on solutions. They've had the budgeting and execution task force, and recently the current NDAA is going through Congress. Both have their own sort of versions of procurement reform. I think it's SPEED in the House. It's Forged in the Senate. Are these things that, first of all, are you tracking these things? Are these things that you think hold promise? Or is this really, maybe it's not a macro policy question, but it's just it's always going to be a constant battle with the bureaucracy.
Sure. Yeah, I won't comment on the merits of any specific bill, but in terms of what Congress can do to initiate change within a large bureaucracy such as the Department of Defense, yeah, absolutely. Because ultimately Congress has oversight authorities. So there's ways that they can change how that oversight is done to encourage what you described as moving away from that compliance mindset to taking informed and calculated risks in order to achieve certain outcomes. So Congress certainly has a role to play in helping that cultural shift happen. I think in particular, again, trusting these acquisition officers who are ultimately stewards of taxpayer dollars, but trusting them to manage capabilities portfolios, like what I mentioned earlier, I think is a very sensible way to start instilling that type of change in mindset ultimately. It'd be very interesting.
Yeah, so on the positive case of this, I am delighted that people are talking about acquisitions reform. This was unthinkable a few years ago. Are you kidding me? Like that, I go on LinkedIn and I see articles being posted about acquisitions reform, and like there's meaningful time being spent on the House of both chambers of the U.S. Congress. It delights me, makes me incredibly happy. So that's the baseline. I'm thrilled that the conversation's happening. My pessimism comes from classic economics here, and it's just that we're in a tragedy of the commons scenario, right? The commons are the FAR. The commons are the acquisitions processes. Who typically wins the commons are going to be the people that have the most invested in winning the commons. So we have a hugely disaggregated, disparate, disorganized community of startups and non-traditional vendors who would like to sell to the government, but their ability to coordinate and fund and lobby into that system is very limited because of the uncoordinated nature of that community. The people who have a very high ability to coordinate are the large primes. So my fear, and what I suspect is going to happen, is that the FAR is going to be rewritten superficially, but it will be rewritten in ways that just privilege the established vendors, because they are the ones who are going to be putting in the most money and time today to make sure it ends up that way.
On kind of similar on the policy angle, the budget cycle is just a fact of life in the federal government. It's probably the piece that I know best of this conversation, and this is probably lowballing it, but from kind of conception, say from a DoD program office, from conception on needs and wants to going through the interagency process, getting through OMB, getting the budget finalized, sent up to Congress. Presumably Congress has an opportunity to sort of adjudicate these questions until a final appropriation is enacted. Generally at least 18 months, sometimes closer to 2 years. Given the genesis of these ideas, it's actually probably much longer if you're being realistic about it. How do you see that playing into the ecosystem? Are there enough things these days where there's ways, whether it's OTAs or what have you, where we've effectively found ways around that for at least for smaller, more nimble acquisitions, or do you still think it's a major problem, and what can we do to address it?
Yeah, I'll give you an example from personal experience. So prior to joining SCSP, I worked for a Dutch company, actually. So it's a tech startup, produced a very novel OSINT solution. The challenge that we faced was that because it was a novel solution, it didn't fit in a budget category with all the departments and agencies that we were speaking with. So we got lumped together with other software-based solutions that really had nothing to do with what we did. But the thing we ran into a lot was that, well, we've already spent all the money that we're allowed to for this particular category. So come see us next year. And in particular for a small company that needs cash to keep the lights on, that's extremely challenging, right? Because then you have that whole friction between how much money do you have to raise from investors. Of course, they want to hear, well, what are your projected sales? And that balancing act, particularly if you're focused exclusively on U.S. government sales, was extremely challenging. So anything that can be done to reform that approach to give individual departments and agencies more leeway in how they spend their money for a small startup like what I worked for would be a tremendous benefit.
Any comments?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything that was just said. I mean, I would argue that budgeting challenges is the second biggest inhibitor of innovation across the U.S. government. I mean, if I were king of acquisitions, I would do what the DOJ did and be able to create a set-aside pot of cash where they can use. They've gotten away from the one-year budgeting cycles to be able to set cash aside for large IT projects. No idea how DOJ got that authority, but everyone else should do it too. Like we just crossed end of fiscal year. Historically, 10% of all federal dollars get spent in the last week of the fiscal year. I refuse to believe that those dollars are well spent. So let's put those into a fund that can be used for future innovation. Like the roadmap has been set. The precedent is out there to be able to allow more flexible funding and create reserve pots of cash. DHS does this actually fairly effectively also. Why isn't everybody else doing it so that we can have money, flexible cash available for innovation?
And the appropriator in me has a lot of heartburn about everything you just said,
Sure.
and hence the problem that we face. I think we're pretty rapidly kind of running out of time here. I got a couple other questions, but I think I just kind of want to kick it to you guys for maybe any sort of final comments, anything that we didn't cover, misnomers that you really want to clear up, just kind of final thoughts on how we really accomplish this goal.
Yeah, I would like to close just to underscore the imperative of making this change happen ultimately, right? If you look at the technological capabilities that a country like China is producing and fielding, time is not on our side to get this right. It's encouraging to see, like, what you were describing, right? People are actually talking about acquisition reform in a very serious way. The Hill is moving. I believe the leadership at the Department of Defense, Department of War, is recognizing that as well. So people are willing to, I think, break a few things to get things moving. So I'll end on a note that, I'm moderately optimistic that we can actually see some meaningful change in the next year or two.
Jeff, final thoughts?
Yeah. My final thought is picking up something that I think you shared. I said that the second biggest inhibitor to innovation was budget. The first biggest, I believe, is cultural. And there's an old saying that culture eats operations for breakfast. I think that's absolutely true. I would argue that the biggest inhibitor to innovation in the DoD is Army Human Resources Command. Until we fix human resources, staffing, identification of talent, training of talent, promoting talent, placing individuals into command billets, nothing else really matters. This is a people problem, and you can't change the system until you change the process for cultivating and placing the people.
Well, thank you. I think that's all of our time. Thank you for your interest, and thanks to the panelists.
Thank you.
Have a good day.